From the studios in beautiful Oceanport, New Jersey, welcome to the biggest and greatest podcast ever. I'm your host, Ray K. Hey, we got a special treat tonight and today, or wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is. It's sort of like a part two, but this is going to be ongoing, I believe. I got Tyler Onstott, and Tyler is going to talk about his coaching career, sort of like the behind-the-scenes stuff that no one, really knows about, and that's what's so exciting. We had a great conversation on the last, episode on the podcast with the Chicago Cubs behind the scenes, and we're going to talk a lot about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff in coaching that most people don't even know about. Tyler, why don't you start getting right into it? Like, how'd you get into coaching right from the beginning? How did that happen?
Yeah, absolutely, Ray. Well, I appreciate you having me on again. I enjoyed our last conversation. So I grew up a huge college basketball fan and knew I wanted to go to Missouri State University for my undergraduate degree. And at that time, the Bears were they just won their first Missouri Valley Conference title my senior year of high school. And at that time, I'd been kind of talking to the team about, wanting to get into coaching basketball, maybe coming to school as a manager. And at that time, I was a high school basketball manager. I was working under a guy named Dusty Killingsworth, who's well known in Southwest Missouri. He was the head boys basketball coach at my high school. And then he's done some coaching at some other local high schools there. And so he kind of helped me get started down that career path and recommended me to Missouri State. So
is the manager the first step? Like, I know when I played ball in high school, there was always those managers, that did all the other things. I guess they keep score, they get the balls, that kind of stuff. Is that the first step into coaching, basically?
If you're not a player, it is. Most coaches played when they were either in high school or definitely in college, but some did not. Barry Henson, for example, who just stepped down as the head coach at SIU Edwardsville, I think he started off working in Gallagher-Iba Arena there at Oklahoma State, working as a personal assistant to Mr. Iba, who's was a well-known figure there in the athletics program at Oklahoma State, and then just worked his way up, worked under Bill Self, and worked at Kansas for a little bit and was the head coach at Oral Roberts, Missouri State, and most recently SIU. And so he started out kind of the same path. So it just kind of varies. It's more connecting with a head coach or assistant coaches, but a manager is a good first step, especially for somebody like me who never really played. I mean, I played basketball growing up, but was never really good at it and never played in high school.
Oh, okay. So you're a manager now. Okay. Carry on from there. Okay.
Yeah, so I started out as a manager, did 1 year in high school, kind of propelled into, did 3 years at Missouri State. I think I talked a little bit last podcast, worked under Paul Lusk for 3 years. Paul he was the associate head coach at Purdue, and then my first year is when he got the job at Missouri State. So actually before that, Conzo Martin, who's now the head coach at Mizzou, he was going to be the coach I worked under, but then he took the job at University of Tennessee. I decided to still go to Missouri State because that's where I wanted to go for undergraduate school, and then worked under Paul Lusk for 3 years. And then after 3 years, got my degree and was like, I want to stay in coaching, but I was having a hard time. At that time, I was 22 years old, was having a hard time finding a job in college athletics. I had a couple interviews for some graduate assistant and graduate manager spots, but they just weren't the right fit for me. So I came back to Missouri State to work on a graduate degree and worked under Kelly and John Harper, and did a year with them, and then decided, I really want to move to Chicago and get my graduate degree at Loyola. And Cheryl Swoops was the head coach at the time, and so she brought me up there as a manager. So I was going to school working on a graduate degree and worked under her. And then her and her staff got let go after my first year. And so the new staff came in, and I actually got promoted to a graduate assistant. And so I was actually on the floor doing coaching things, X's and O's coaching to the best of my ability my last year. So overall, I spent 6 years in college basketball, overlapped by 2 years as a video coordinator for the Bears baseball program at Missouri State. And my last year, we came within one game away from being in the College World Series. So that was a pretty fun year.
So you're earning your wings now. I mean, that's a lot of experience to work your way through, I mean, it sounds like it's 6 years. I mean,
it is. And I've stepped out away from college athletics, but I think the experiences and the people you meet are really can propel you in any career, and the life lessons I learned and just some of the hardships that not me personally, but teams I was with had to go through. I went through coaching change. I've been through a season where we only won 2 basketball games out of, I think we were 2-23 my last year at Loyola. My second year at Missouri State, I think we were 11-20. And then I've been under, the college baseball where we were in the super regionals. And then my last year at Missouri State with Kelly and John Harper, we made the WNIT. We, I think, had a 7-game winning streak there toward the end of the season that propelled us into the WNIT. And so I think all those experiences can help you in life. You can be a part of programs that are successful, and you can be a part of programs where it's like, hey, we're not winning, but we're fighting through challenges, and eventually those programs overcome those challenges, and you learn a lot of life lessons in those aspects as well.
What were some of the life lessons?
Absolutely. So I think for college athletes in general, you come to campus at 18 years old. You're not even, a lot of college athletes, they're not even old enough to drink or, they're not supposed to be drinking. So, you're still very young. And then, you leave campus at 21, 22 years old. So some of those life lessons are, being able to fight through adversity. For example, your friends, college basketball, I think, has the highest turnover rate in terms of not only coaching, but players transferring. So, you're going to have friends transfer out of the school that you're in. You're going to go through coaching changes. And the same thing in life, you're going to go through jobs where your boss leaves or gets let go, and colleagues leave, and colleagues who might be your friends. And so those challenges, and then the challenges of just being around a family. You're spending, you flip it on ESPN, and you're just seeing 40 minutes of basketball, but what you're not seeing is, the conditioning at 8 o'clock in the morning that these players are doing, the study hall. I think at Missouri State, they had to do, I think it was 10, 15 hours of study hall a week, and they're doing that together. The film, the behind the scenes watching film. So you're spending a good majority of those college years with the people around you, and they become like family. And then to kind of see that family sometimes get I don't want to say torn apart, but people move on to different, better fits for themselves. And so those life lessons, and then just being in that environment where you are on the spotlight on campus. Everybody on campus recognizes you. So you have to learn with not only going to school, dealing with your own personal stuff, but also knowing that people are going to come up to you and want to be your friend and want to get their picture with you and have you sign autographs and things like that. So kind of learning those ropes as well is big life lessons.
Well, the athletes, the lay person like me that doesn't know any of these behind the scenes things, you think, they go to class, they really don't have to study because they're the star. The professors give them breaks. They take these easy classes like cooking or whatever. But it sounds like it's actually quite grueling being a student athlete. Is that correct?
It is, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Ray, because actually when I was at Missouri State, we had 2 players. One was a cellular and molecular biology major, and then the other one, who she actually lives here in St. Louis, she's a great friend of mine. She was the first person. I think she got some sort of engineering degree from Missouri State. I'm not sure of the exact name, but it was the first degree of that major awarded to anybody. And Missouri State's been around since 1905, and it was the first degree category awarded to somebody. And this was a very successful women's basketball player. And so, the persona is they're taking these easy classes and they're getting out of class. And I actually think as a college athlete, it's harder to get through school because you are missing so much class, and because, you only can take certain classes. Practice times, they're not going to move practice times for certain players and accommodate. Sometimes they will, depending on how many. But, usually your classes are going to be 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and then your practice is going to be 12 to 3. And so you've got to schedule not only your electives around those, but some majors only offer certain classes at certain times during certain parts of the year. And so working all those in, trying to figure out how am I going to do all this, graduate in 4 years, and be able to play college basketball and put the effort I need in to maintain my scholarship, it can be quite a challenge.
Now, what's the story with scholarships? I mean, you hear, like, how does that really work? I mean, are they real scholarships, or is it like more like, I don't know what it is, where it's financial aid, or what's the scholarship process, the scholarship, releases? How does that work?
Yeah, so how it works is, and it's different for each sport. So and it depends on the school and the program. And so I'll use Missouri State, for example. So men's and women's basketball, those are going to be full ride scholarships for the most part. You'll occasionally bring on a walk-on player who's paying for college totally on their own, gets no financial aid support whatsoever, doesn't even get, a stipend for meals or anything. They're just at a walk-on. But your full scholarship players are not only going to get, their tuition paid for up to, I think it's 15 credit hours a semester or something, which compliance rules are changing all the time. And I have not been involved in college athletics for 2 years, so it might have changed. But just going off my 6 years. And then players are also getting, if they don't live in the dorms on campus, and most coaches require their players live in the dorms at least freshman and sophomore years. If you live in the dorms, you don't get a housing stipend. But if you don't live in the dorms, then you'll get some sort of a housing stipend. And then you'll also get put on a meal plan for usually the athletes get a full meal plan where, like at Missouri State, they have an unlimited meal plan. So you can go as many times as you want throughout the day into the dining hall. And then for baseball players, it's different. So baseball teams are awarded, let's say, 20 full scholarships to divide among, 35 different players. And so some players are basically playing for not even a quarter of a scholarship. Other players, your big time players you're bringing in are playing for a full scholarship. And so, it just kind of varies. Each team gets a set number of scholarships, and how it works is it's kind of like financial aid. The players aren't getting a check handed over to them and saying, here, go down to the financial aid office and pay your tuition. It's, all done through the computer system and through basically the athletics department puts it in the student's account for that purpose. Because, as with all the stuff going on in college basketball, I would, no disrespect to the players out there, but I would never trust giving a kid a $10,000 check saying, oh, go down to the SARS office.
Well, you're begging me to ask the question because I was going to eventually ask it, but I guess might as well ask it now because, I don't hold back on this show. Right. I mean, there's been some scandal recently, about paying players and, some stuff that you always suspect's going on. And I guess it is. What's your opinion on all that? I mean, this goes on. Have you seen it, or what's your opinion in general, Tyler, about all that?
I have not personally seen it, and I'm one of those who, if I would have seen something like that, I would have turned it in immediately. I have a great relationship with the administrators at those schools, and they trust me, and so I would have turned something like that in. I have heard stories, and I won't name any names, of certain coaches who not really involved in the scheme that's going on, but just compliance rules. And I'm not talking paying players, but coaches who, you're only allowed to practice your players so many hours per week, but coaches that will go over that. So my opinion is, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you, Ray. This stuff is going on, obviously, because the FBI is doing an investigation. And I think it's more, I'm not going to say mid-majors aren't innocent, but the big time, the Power 5 schools and trying to bring in top recruits, like recruits are what I call one and done. So they're going to come to school for 1 year because that's a requirement to enter the NBA draft. And then they're going on to the NBA, hoping to get drafted. So, your big schools are trying to recruit those players. And so I think that's where a lot of the scandals come in. And the head coaches, unfortunately, kind of take a fall because a lot of it, if you've noticed in these scandals, are the assistant coaches. And so, as a head coach, you're overseeing the entire program, yes, but you've also got support staff, compliance you're reporting to assistant coaches, and assistant coaches, especially in college basketball, are turning over like crazy. It's hard to keep track of who's doing what when. And so I think that's where a lot of the scandals come in is not – I won't say efficiently monitoring your assistant coaches, but assistant coaches stepping out of line and putting their head coaches in a bad spot. And I'm not saying head coaches aren't, guilty either, but a lot of it is coming from the assistant coaches.
Okay, that's fair. Back to what we were told. I was just curious on a walk-on. The guy's obviously good. I don't know if walk-ons could be starters. Maybe they could even be superstars. Do they eventually get scholarships, Tyler, or do they always have to pay all 4 years? If you make a walk-on freshman year, do you get a scholarship sophomore year?
That's a great question. That's actually up to the head coach. I know at Missouri State we had a walk-on my freshman year, and I believe he did get a scholarship his second year, and then I think he ended up transferring and going somewhere else after that. And so it's all up to the head coach. A lot of walk-ons do. We had at Missouri State, we had a walk-on when I was with the women's basketball team. She was 4'8". We actually had two walk-ons that year. One was 5'1", and the other was 4'8".
You mean 4 foot 8 inches tall?
Yes.
Whoa. Okay.
Yes. And she did a lot of stuff in practice in terms of, just kind of having an extra body at practice, but she did get into some games and, she could shoot the three. And when the coaches saw her, they were like, the height might be an issue, but she can shoot and would be a good practice player. And she turned out to be a phenomenal practice player for us. And she got into some games. And then our other walk-on that year, she started out, same thing, kind of just as a practice player, but then she eventually started toward the end of the season. And so, even though she wasn't a scholarship player, they still get the same opportunities to travel. They still get a locker. They still get all the other benefits. They're just not getting their tuition paid for and all the extra stipends that come with being a college basketball player. But they still, if they're good enough and the coach likes them and they make good grades, absolutely. I've seen cases where coaches will call them in and say, hey, we're going to put you on scholarships. So it's actually a great opportunity for players who think who didn't get offered right out of high school, but maybe could go play JUCO and then do a year as a walk-on and finish out their senior year on scholarship. So there's so many avenues you can go, but it all depends on the program and the coach.
Well, the walk-ons intrigue me because, one of my favorite movies is Rudy, the walk-on, so you always root for the underdog, so that's always a pretty cool thing when you get a walk-on that makes the, especially NCAAs or you see March Madness coming up. Let's talk about March Madness. It's coming up. What are your thoughts on all this and your experiences with March Madness in your career?
Absolutely. So I am one of those who, in 6 years of college basketball, I've never got to experience a March Madness in terms of being there. I've experienced, WNITs and things. But it is one of those. I've actually last year, for example, when Loyola played Kansas State in the Final Four, two of the coaches on Kansas State's bench, they played in the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 to go to the Final Four. Two of the coaches on Kansas State I worked under at Missouri State. And then, of course, being a Loyola grad, I knew all the coaches. So it was like either way, I was going to one of my teams, somebody I knew was going to the Final Four. And so, for this year, I have not followed it as much as I usually do in past. I followed the Valley a little bit. This past weekend, the Missouri Valley Conference had their conference tournament here in St. Louis, and so I followed that. And Bradley ended up the underdog, winning as the number 5 seed, and is going to the dance. And so, we'll see how they do. But it's a neat experience. I've never been there, but the coaches and players, I worked under Kelly Harper, who won 3 national championships at Tennessee, and they said there is nothing like going to the NCAA tournament. They said it is like the World Series of baseball or the Super Bowl of football. It's everybody in the country during that time frame knows who you are, and especially if you're a mid-major or underdog, they're pulling for you. And so it's a great experience to be a part of, on the outside looking in.
It might even be one of the top, it might be like equivalent to a Super Bowl then, right? I mean, because it goes on for 3 weeks or whatever. It's, everyone's watching it. It's probably the most exciting tournament I think there is, because there's always those at the buzzer games and, these upsets, one seed loses to 16, it's right. Every year it's something exciting, so I'm so thrilled it's coming up now. Actually, my local team, Monmouth University, was 0-12 or 0-13, and they got a shot at making the tournament. How's that for crazy? Starting the season out 0-12, and then you could make it. Just stuff like that is so cool. What's it like traveling, with these teams that travel? Like, let's get into that. What's it? I mean, you're going to be gone for, I guess, a couple nights. You're going to miss class. I mean, is it first class stuff, or is it just charter, or what's the travel like for these teams?
Well, it depends on the school. And so at Missouri State, we were very blessed to be able to have, especially men's basketball, we were, especially in conference, we were charter. We had our own charter plane that was rented out to us. And so we were usually, if we would play a game on, let's say, I think they were Friday, Sunday when I was in the Valley. And so you would fly up Thursday. So let's say we were going to go play Creighton. I think Creighton, Wichita State were our travel partners. And so we go fly up to Omaha, play Creighton on a Friday night. Bus pulls right up to the plane. You don't have to go through security or you don't have to really wait for the plane. You just the bus pulls right up on the tarmac, and as a manager, we're helping the pilots load luggage onto the plane. The coaches are out there helping too. You get on the plane, you fly to your city, check into your hotel. Usually there's meals there waiting for you. And then you get up the next morning, you have a shoot around. Sometimes if you get there early enough the night before, you'll practice at the opponent's arena. At Missouri State, we generally would practice there in Springfield and then would fly out that night. But it just kind of varies on practice slots that the visiting team has and the coach's preference. And then, you play the game, and then especially during the conference, you have 2 games on a weekend. So you'll usually bus to the next city. So we bus to Wichita and then fly back to Springfield and whatnot. And so, a combination of a lot of bus and charter travel. And then you also have, on your non-conference, you'll do a lot of not first class, but coach flying. I remember my first road trip, we bussed down to Tulsa, played Oral Roberts, and then got up early the next morning and flew to Albuquerque and flew commercial to Albuquerque, played our game in New Mexico, stayed the night, and then flew back. We actually had a layover in Denver and then flew into Branson, Missouri, and had to bus an hour back to campus. And so you're definitely racking up the frequent flyer miles as working in college athletics.
And what level now, Tyler? I mean, I hear Rick Pitino, I hear Dean Smith, Tyler Onstott. Like, where do you fall in all this? Are you a high assistant, or are you head coach, or what exactly at coaching level are you, or were you when you coached?
Yeah, so I actually started off, again, I'll say 4 years as a student manager, 5 years. And so a student manager isn't really a coach. They're doing the behind-the-scenes work. They're assisting the director of basketball operations. But then my last year at Loyola, I was a graduate assistant coach. And so I was on staff, so I was an assistant coach, but I was going to grad school. So they call them, so like my last year at Loyola, my tuition was paid for. I got a housing stipend. I got, a paycheck. And then I was on staff, when they showed the player or the coaches, individual pictures on the team website, mine was there. I was on the floor coaching.
You were on the bench, you were on the floor during the game?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Even as a student manager, I was on the bench. As a manager, you're more behind the bench or at the end of the bench. But as a graduate assistant, I was right there, not yelling out plays, but, assisting our head coach and helping, usually the head coach will assign different duties during the game. So like one coach will be in charge. Their primary focus is defense. The other might be offense. And for me, it was more, I was more taking stats during the game and relaying those to the head coach during the timeout. And, usually when we played Missouri State, because, I'd worked at Missouri State and then went up to Loyola. So usually when you played Missouri State, I was a lot more involved in the scout and things like that. Just because I knew those players, I had worked, with that team before. But you're doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff, but you're still, calling out, doing X's and O's things during the game. So no, I'm no Dean Smith by any means, not even close, but I was still very much a part of, 6 wonderful years in college basketball, and kind of the backbone support staff wise is what I would classify that as.
And what did you like most about coaching?
I think seeing a player who maybe started off coming to campus at 18 years old and very very shy, very, maybe didn't want to work as hard as the upperclassmen, and just was kind of there taking it all in. And then seeing them develop into a leader, I think that was the best part of my coaching experience. And then the second thing I would say is really the interactions I got with other coaches. Just because I was on support staff, not necessarily an assistant coach or head coach, but you're still colleague. Consider yourself a colleague of the coaches in the league. And so Steve Alford, who recently got let go at UCLA, but a big time college basketball coach, played under Bobby Knight. I've had many interactions with him.
What was he like? What was Steve Alford like? I mean, he was big time.
He was very down to earth, especially to me. I remember he started off, his first Division I job was at Southwest Missouri State, which is now Missouri State. And so, I grew up kind of watching him coach the Bears and then transition into Iowa. And so, having that kind of introduction to him and then getting to meet him personally and stayed in touch with him. He was a very down to earth guy and very appreciative of the stops he's had. He had it rough at Iowa there. I think he was at Iowa for 7 years, but would never talk bad about Iowa or his relationship with Bobby Knight or anything like that. I mean, very appreciative to be in the game of basketball.
Who were some of the other? I know you coached for. We were talking earlier. Tell us, our listeners, some of the other. I know Cheryl Burnett mentioned. Yeah, I mean, you coached with some pretty impressive people. Can you talk about some of the others, if you may?
Absolutely. So Cheryl Burnett, I never worked directly for, but she's a great friend of mine. Got to know her through working camps at Missouri State, and she took then SMS to 2 Final Fours, and her last Final Four in 2001, Jackie Stiles, who I actually worked with at Missouri State. She was the NCAA women's all-time leading scorer for many years.
Oh, she was a legend. She's a legend. Yeah, Jackie Stiles. Okay. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know her very well. And then Cheryl Swoops, obviously, who we've mentioned several times. I work for Kay Doctor, who I mentioned on the last podcast, all-time leading scorer at Bowling Green. Steve Woodbury, who him and Danny Manning helped lead Kansas to the Final Four back in the day. I worked with him at Missouri State, and he is now an assistant coach under Danny Manning at Wake Forest. Conzo Martin, I came to know from kind of, I won't say being recruited, but trying to get my foot in the door there at Missouri State. And even though I never worked for him, got to know him and John Harris and Kent Williams. And so I've worked under several coaches. Pat Baldwin, who's now the head coach at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He was an assistant coach when I was at Missouri State, and I knew Pat very well. Jermaine Henderson, who's now an assistant coach under Bruce Weber at Kansas State. Him and Brad Korn, both are assistant coaches there. Very good friends of mine. Kyle Smith-Peters, he's a head coach at John A. Logan College. And then, of course, Porter Moser led Loyola to the Final Four, even though I didn't work directly for him, shared an office with the men's basketball team because I was right down the hallway. So I know him. So I've worked around and for some very high-profile people in the game. And then, Kelly Harper, who played under Pat Summitt, who I think is, if not the greatest college basketball coach in men's or women's basketball history, definitely up there. So, I've worked under many coaches who even played under legends, and so having that interaction and kind of network is definitely a great way to not only break into the game but be involved in it and get to know other coaches.
Oh yeah. Who was the best? Was there one best athlete, baseball or basketball, that was far and above everybody else? Or who were some of the best athletes that you saw play or you
absolutely
coached?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Missouri State, my first year when I was a manager, we had a guy named Kyle Weems. The year before, he was named Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year. Everybody thought he was going to go into the NBA. Definitely could have played in the NBA D League, but wanted to go overseas and make some money, and he's still playing overseas. He was by far, I think he was ranked number 10 or 11, Missouri State all-time leading scorer. Super nice, down-to-earth guy. But just a heck of a player, could shoot, could, defend, and just was an outstanding team leader. So he definitely ranks up there. And during my time with baseball, I definitely would say Jake Berger and John Harris both were first-round draft picks when I was a video coordinator for the Bears. John, drafted by the Toronto Blue Jays. I think he made it up to AAA this year. And then Jake I think he was 15th overall in the first round by the Chicago White Sox a couple years ago. And he's battled some injuries, but again, he's going to fight and be healthy. And Tate Matheny, Mike Matheny's son, I worked with, a heck of a player. He's coming up in the Red Sox organization. And then I would say at my time at Loyola, we had a girl named Taylor Manuel. She was a post player who went overseas and had some, just a phenomenal athlete, could shoot, would get down there in the post and just play probably the most hard-nosed defensive player I've ever been around. And she's playing overseas. And so, I've been blessed to be around a lot of great athletes. But I would say of all of those, probably Kyle Weems would be the most well-known. But definitely every team I've been a part of has had somebody who's not only had success at the university level, but would go on and play either overseas or in pro ball and really have success there.
Who you're I'm going off the script a little. Who your top three? Who's the top three all-time collegiate players of all time? Who's your top three?
Top three collegiate players
Give me
of
three.
all time.
Give me three. Yeah.
Give you three. Okay. Definitely would say, and this isn't somebody I had to work for or with, correct?
This is all-time college best players.
Okay. Oh, I would definitely, making me think here, Ray, I would definitely put Jackie Stiles up there just because.
Oh, okay, including men and female. So this is including both. You put her in the top three. Okay.
Yes, Jackie Stiles, Cheryl Swoops, would definitely put her on the list. And then I would say, going to pick a men's player here, I would definitely say Tyler Hansbrough ranks up there. His jersey hangs in the rafters at North Carolina. And, he went on to play in the NBA, but being a Missouri guy like I am and watching him come up through high school and seeing the progression, what he did, he was definitely one of my favorite players growing up and definitely had a heck of a career at all three levels, high school, college, and professional.
Well, that's an interesting top three because automatically you think like, maybe Lou Alcindor or Bill Walton, but your three, I got to say, is quite a unique three for a top three.
Absolutely.
I got to give you that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm missing, Larry Bird, for instance, a Missouri Valley guy. Can't forget about Larry Bird. But for me, I always we were talking about, and I won't call them underdogs, but, we think of the kind of like what you said, some of the names you brought up, but, these players may not be as well known on that level, but they still had remarkable careers and represented their universities and programs well and
Sure.
are just good people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. What advice, Tyler, would you give, say, to an upcoming ball player through all your experience in coaching? What are a couple of words of wisdom you would give to them?
Absolutely. Hard work. Be the first one to the gym, first one to the playing field, last one to leave. Go to class every day. It doesn't matter if you got back on the road, from the road 8 a.m., midnight and your class is at 8 a.m. the next. Go to every class every day. And definitely network, because the people you meet and play in college basketball just might be your next boss, so networking and taking advantage of, going to college basketball camps, when you're in high school, reaching out to coaches, getting to know coaches. And even if it's not necessarily for your benefit as a player, you never know what your future holds, whether it's in coaching or just in life down the road. And so I would say for sure the first two are the most important, working harder than anybody else and going to class, because let's face it, Ray, if you don't go to class, it doesn't matter how good you are, especially at the college level, you're not going to keep your scholarship. And coaches are very, very serious about that. And so just get used to going to every class every day and working harder than you've ever worked in your life, because it's a whole different ballgame between high school and college. That's for sure.
Okay, great. Love it. Great advice. What we were talking earlier, we were shooting the breeze, and this, you don't think of this kind of thing affecting players, Tyler, but we were talking about coaching changes, and you called it the coaching carousel. Can you talk about that and how that affects players?
Absolutely. So these coaches that are coming into a recruit's home, starting their junior year of high school, they become like, and for some players, a coach is like they're another parent to them. They're basically taking you saying, I want you to spend the next 4 years with me in my basketball program around these other people I've recruited. And so it is very difficult to go through a coaching change. I went through one when I was at Loyola. I was a manager for Loyola when Cheryl got let go, and the whole staff ended up getting let go. And, I ended up being bumped up to a GA, but seeing, someone who had brought me to Chicago and gave me the opportunity to in another city, that was a really tough deal for me. And so as a player, I saw it from the outside too. I was still working under Paul Lusk at Missouri State for the men's team, but during that time, the women's basketball team made a change. And so my good friends were playing women's basketball. And so I saw the effect it had on them. Nyla Millison ended up getting let go, and they brought in Kelly Harper. Nyla's now at George Mason, having success out there. But just seeing the players come in, and now you're playing under a coach who did not recruit you, who, most coaches are pretty open to having everybody return from a previous staff, but it's still a different vibe. Because that wasn't the person that brought you to campus. And so it's, your first thought that runs through your mind is, I'm going to transfer. Most athletes, as soon as they find out their head coach is leaving, they're like, I'm going to transfer. But then when cooler heads prevail and they realize that, hey, maybe this is a new opportunity for me, or maybe this coach is going to offer me something that the previous staff might not have, it can turn out to work for the better for all parties involved, including the coach who got let go, because, they might find a job that was a better fit for them. And so, at the end of the day, it's all about doing the right thing. And that's, fulfilling your scholarship obligation and, your commitment, but also realizing that you're getting your school paid for. And it's, it doesn't matter who's leading the program. They want what's best for you. And so usually when cooler heads prevail, that's when you kind of see it all. I don't want to say go away, but you kind of see it all come to a conclusion in terms of a coaching change. And most people just know that's the business and accept it. And with coaching changes, you see it coming 9 times out of 10. As a recruit, I'm probably not going to play for this coach all 4 years, but I'm going to give it a chance.
Right. Okay. I was wondering before, I meant to ask Tyler on the stats. You're keeping stats. All right. I'm thinking the head coach, usually you got about, you probably play 5 or 6 guys most of the game. Maybe you go to 8. I'm just thinking logically, just being a fan, usually there's like an 8 rotation, it seems, maybe even a 5 rotation or 6. How do stats come into play? Okay, so he got 11 rebounds, he got 6 rebounds, like in a way, so what? I mean, we're winning the game. Like, where did the stats come into play? Like, how does that help me coach? If I'm playing these same guys anyway, what do the stats do for me?
Absolutely. So they are going to more be of benefit, especially the stats I did later in the game, because I was tracking, when I was at Loyola, I was tracking who was shooting free throws on the other team.
Okay.
And I was tracking, and then same thing when I was a manager at Willard, I was tracking where they were shooting from. This was high school. I went to high school at Willard, just outside Springfield, Missouri. I was tracking where they were shooting from on the floor, so we knew kind of where we needed to, maybe defend a little bit better, and then who was shooting free throws on the other team. So that way, when it came later in the game, if we knew we were going to go into a situation where we needed to foul a player in order for them to go to the line, that way we would have the potential to get the ball back quicker. Who's going to be our best chance to send to the line, but they're not going to make their free throws.
Okay.
And so those are very important. And, especially when I was a manager in high school, I was always going to the coach saying, hey, if we get into a situation where we need to foul number 3 because he's 1 for 7 from the line today, to where their best players, 6 for 6, we don't want him going to the line. And most coaches going in kind of have an idea, but again, there's that human element involved in that, number 1 might have had 12 rebounds against you the last game, but they may have the flu this game. And so you're kind of thinking on the whim, who do I want to match up with who in different scenarios? And so stats play a big role. And then just overall, especially at the college level and conference play, you're playing your teams at least twice during the regular season, your conference opponents, and then get into the tournament. So the stats are more used for looking at film and saying, okay, we need to do a better job of this. We let so-and-so get to the line, we fouled him 3 times versus somebody else, and, he made most of his free throws. We don't need to be fouling him, or, so-and-so, shot 15 threes and only made 3 of them. So we're going to back off of him a little bit on defense, to where somebody else might have went 7 for 7 from the 3-point line. So it's like, hey, we didn't play very good defense against him. So stats definitely play a role, more during the kind of breaking down the games, but definitely towards the end of the games. When you're looking at who to send to the line and who's in foul trouble, they definitely play a role.
Oh yeah, the stats sound like could affect the outcome of the game. I mean, obviously. I never thought of it that way. You got to foul that guy, and you think the head coach just sort of innately knows it, but I mean, he's getting it from you.
Absolutely.
Very
and there's so much
interesting. Go.
Yeah, and there's so much as a head coach that you're thinking about. And that's the thing is, a lot of times as a fan, and I'm guilty of it too, you sit back and you're like, that's all on the head coach, that's all on the head coach. But the head coaches, they're not only watching. That's why, you see these teams with so many assistants, because there's so much stuff you have to keep track of nowadays in the game. You have to know, how many timeouts do I have left? Coach might not be thinking at that particular moment, oh, I've only got 2 timeouts left. He or she relies on their assistants to relay, hey, we've only got 2 timeouts. You're sitting there as a coach, you're focusing on what's going on the floor and not thinking about anything else. And so it's it's even your assistant's jobs to be like, hey, we need to get so-and-so out of the game because they've played, they haven't had a break in 10 minutes and they're tired. But a head coach, it's an extra set of eyes for the head coach, the assistants, and they're very, very important, especially when it comes to recruiting who's going to be playing for you. The assistants are, I think, just as important, if not more important than the head coach, because the assistants are the ones having the personal relationship with these players and presenting them to the head coach 9 times out of 10.
Now the head coach, how, I know in grammar school and, when the kid's young, obviously the coach is extremely important. Now, as you go up the levels, now you're in college, Division I, Division II, any college level, how important is the coach? I mean, do they just, you practice, you prepare, and then you let the players play? I mean, do they really affect the outcome of the game, or is it the players on the court? I guess there's some strategies, or how important is that coach? I mean, are they worth 10 points a game, or 15 points, or 1 point, or can you even measure it? Like, how important is that? Is the head coach out there?
I think it depends on, it's a number of factors, Ray. It's the head coach obviously is, the one calling the shots at the end of the day. And when, losses, a good coach will always take the blame for losses and will give credit to the players for wins. That's just kind of how it's looked at in sports is, hey, if we lose the game, it's my fault we lost the game. But if we win the game, it's all the kids. And so I think there's that element, but it's everything. It's, the assistance from, staying the extra 15 minutes to maybe watch a game that, when they're out recruiting at these tournaments at the high school level, your coach is pretty much going in or going to know who they want to recruit and who they're going after. But it might be that assistant staying for that extra game that none other coach at the other universities are staying for, to maybe find that diamond in the rough kid who turns around and wins you a ball game. And in that sense, that could cost you, that could earn you another year on your contract, that particular win that player helped. And so there's so many factors, but ultimately the coach is the one calling the shots. So the game does come down to them, but there's so many moving elements between the players and the staff being ready. How prepared was the staff? You hear that all the time. How prepared was the staff for this game? Mm-hmm. And that translates down to the players. I've seen games where going in, and I won't name any universities in particular, coaches, but the staff was just, the scout was not where it should have been for that game. And so the players did not feel like they were prepared. But then I've seen games where the coaches were just scouted that opponent. I mean, you couldn't have done a better job scouting and presenting the game plan to the players throughout the week leading up to the game. And then the players, didn't capitalize. And so there's so many moving parts. So I would say overall, we have a saying at Missouri State, all in. It's all in. If the trainer's having an off night, that could cost you there. Mm-hmm. Because if the trainer only gets 30 seconds to bandage someone up, if they're bleeding, and if he doesn't get it done within that 30 seconds, that could cost you 2 minutes from that player right there. If a manager is doesn't leave the court early enough, kind of cleaning up after the media timeouts, that could cost you, give your team a technical foul and cost you 2 points, plus the other team gets the ball back. So there's so many elements. So
every
it's
piece
all
is
in.
important, right? Every single piece of that comes into play, from the trainer to the assistant coach to all the way through. Let's have a little fun. What are some of the coolest arenas in basketball that you've been to?
Absolutely. So my favorite that I was at was the Pit in New Mexico. It was my first
I love the way that sounds, the Pit. Tell me about it. Tell me about that.
Well, it's underground, so it sits. I think it's 1,300 and some feet above sea level. And so what makes the Pit so unique is that the arena sits underground, and you can feel it, the day before practice week, even running, because New Mexico is the elevation's so high, you could kind of feel they say you'll get shortness of breath really quickly in that arena. And it's right. It's a lot different than playing, here in the Midwest. And just the history in the Pit, a guy like Luke Longley, who played championships for the Bulls, he went to school at New Mexico.
Okay.
And so it's a cool arena to just the history and the elevation and just what it means to college basketball. They've hosted March Madness there numerous times, and a lot of, even the Bulls, they played, I believe, the Seattle Supersonics there during the 90s. Mike Jordan, they had an exhibition game there at the Pit. So kind of knowing Michael Jordan played on this floor,
right, that
was a really cool experience. I would definitely put in the Valley for sure my favorite arena. Northern Iowa's got a great arena. I would say Missouri State has the best facilities in the Valley. University of Miami, we played at my last year at Loyola. Of course, that's a ACC school. University of Pittsburgh, we played at. Really nice arenas. I think both had just gone through renovations. And then you play at arenas like in Terre Haute, Indiana State, where, okay, the arena is not the greatest, but thinking like Larry Bird, played here and kind of that Larry Bird history there in Terre Haute. And so, every arena that we went to had some sort of history or piece to it that played a part in college basketball. But for sure, the Pit is by far my favorite.
What are some of the the crazy things that you've experienced that have happened? Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, so I think the craziest was when I was so my last 2 years at Missouri State, I was substitute teaching and going to school and managing college basketball. It just so happened I could substitute teach, go to practice, and then go to school at night if I wasn't taking an online class. And so we had a game at Creighton. So I had just got done teaching school, and then we ended up, our flight we were supposed to fly out the next day and fly to Creighton, or we were supposed to fly out that night and then play Creighton the next day. So we ended up, our flight got canceled out of Springfield, so we had to fly up the day of the game to Creighton. So I did like a half day substitute teaching, and our game at that time was being televised. I think it was on ESPNU. And so I did a half-day substitute teaching there in my hometown, went over, caught the team flight, went up to Creighton. We did the game, checked into the hotel first. So we were in the hotel like 3 hours, checked in, literally checked out, went to the arena, played the game, flew back that night, and then I was back substitute teaching at the same school the next morning. And it's funny, a couple of my students actually came up to me and were like, we watched the game last night, and how did you get all the way up to Omaha and back? And I'm like, it's magic, guys. That's how that happened. So, there was that. And then for me, I think at Loyola, the craziest story I have is when we played University of Pittsburgh, and something with the player schedule, we couldn't fly. There was some reason we couldn't fly. I don't know if it was budget or what it was or scheduling. But anyway, we had to bus from Chicago to Pittsburgh. And so we did that the night before. We got to Pittsburgh at a decent time. We left, mid-morning, but then flying back, we had a 7:00 game at Pittsburgh. Now, this is Eastern time. And then we had to drive all the way back to Chicago. And I think we got to Chicago at like 4:30 in the morning or something. And then players had to go to class at 8. And I remember the coaches, I don't even think they went home. I think they dropped off and we're going to see a recruit, and then we're coming right back to campus. And so, it was really That was probably the longest trip I've ever had in college athletics was at Chicago to Pittsburgh, and being on the same bus and hearing the same song over and over. And
what song was it? Do you remember?
I don't remember. There's been so many songs.
Okay.
I know at Missouri State before games we'd always play. There's no words to it, but there's a song called Tsunami that they always wanted to blast on the bus as we were pulling up to baseball stadiums. So, and then we had a song for, I'm not going to name the song, but after we would win baseball games, there was a song that was played in the locker room and players were celebrating. I'll just leave it at that. But
okay.
It was a well-known song that wouldn't be suitable for this audience.
What's your favorite song?
My favorite song, definitely, I'll say either Running Down a Dream or by Tom Petty or Give Me All Your Lovin' by ZZ Top, and then People Back Home by Florida Georgia Line. Those are my top three.
Okay. I thought I'd throw that in. We're going to have a hit and miss come up soon here for the word association, but I just wanted to throw that in. Tell me about the time. This was kind of crazy when we were talking earlier that, was it some guy outscored your entire team in like a half? What's the deal with that? I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Yeah, so it was my second year at Missouri State. We were playing Creighton. Doug McDermott, who I believe he's with the Indiana Pacers now. I know he spent a couple years with the Chicago Bulls, got drafted out of Creighton, played for the Bulls, and then played, I believe, with Oklahoma City Thunder, maybe spent some time with the Mavericks there. But he ended up, this was his senior year, and he was just unstoppable. I'm sorry, it was his junior year. He was just unstoppable, and he ended up scoring, I think, 32 points in the second half alone, and I think we only scored like 29. And I remember going back to the locker room after the game and grabbing food, and ESPN came across, and it was breaking news. Doug McDermott outscores entire opponent in the second half of team, second half of a game against Missouri State. And it's like, thanks ESPN for giving us some love. But it was, he just couldn't miss that game. We tried double teaming him, and he was just that phenomenal of a player. There was really nothing you could do to stop him. When he's on, he's on. And that's why he's made it so long in the NBA. And he's one of the hardest workers I've been around. I don't know Doug personally, but I know coaches who have been around Doug, and he is just not only a down-to-earth kid, but just first one, again, what I was telling you, first one to the gym, last one to the leave, always went to class, just did the next right thing. And that's what makes Doug McDermott. And of course, having his dad, his dad was the head coach at Creighton. I'm sure there were a couple more plays going to him than most other kids, but when you're that good, that's going to happen. Right.
That's inspirational. It's great hearing those kind of things, about the hard work, and it's just a good thing in everything, not only basketball, but everything people do. Tyler, are you out of coaching now, or do you want to get back into it? Do you miss it? Tell me your feelings on it. Like, where are you now in coaching?
I am not currently coaching. I stay in touch with a lot of coaches and really, I still do a lot of networking and coaching and getting to know coaches. I'm not currently employed by a university. I've thought about getting into it here in the St. Louis area, like high school level or even youth level. But I like doing a lot of life coaching. So I still consider myself a coach, and it starts with just, coming on podcasts and talking to people, kind of like what I'm doing now, and helping Eric out with We Are All a Little Crazy, and just getting opportunities here and there to coach. So I'm still a life coach, whether that's mentoring someone at work or someone I cross paths with. I'm just not involved in the college game. But that's not to say I will never not be a part of it again. I think my contacts are widespread enough where I could get back into it if I really wanted to. But I'm really enjoy where I'm at right now in my life.
What, we were talking about Dean Smith or Rick Pitino, and these days, I don't know what the number is, but I'm sure these coaches make, some crazy number, probably like $5 million a year. I bet it's at least that. What did the coaches make from, when you coached? That level coach, would they make $300,000 a year? Do you know what their salaries were? I'm just curious at that level, what they made or earned.
Yeah, so your coaches that are making $2 to $5 million are going to be your, Mike Krzyzewski's, your elite coaches at the Power 5 schools. Most coaches in private institutions, those numbers are not released to the public. I have an idea, but most coaches, like at Missouri State, I think they're making 300 to 400,000. That's without incentives. That's just their base. So you could be making upwards of 6, 7, 800,000 with incentives. Again, it just depends on the institution. I know Barry at Southern Illinois, I think he was making, I want to say it was 350,000 a year. I think Coach Kelly is making somewhere around 300,000 a year. Your assistants are making anywhere from 50,000 to over 100,000 a year, and so it's a really well compensated industry to be in. Plus, not a lot of people know this, but your head coaches are getting a courtesy car to use, so they're not having to drive a personal car back and forth from work, for recruiting and things like that. They're getting gas reimbursement. They're getting a cell phone allowance for their phone. And so they're getting all these other incentives. But your base, at the Division I level is going to be usually between, I'd say, 120 and 500,000 base plus incentives.
Now, once you're a coach, it sounds like once you're a head coach and you're in that world, I mean, it's not, I don't know if it's the life of Riley, but I mean, it sounds like, why would you ever want to leave it? I mean, just stay in that. And it just seems like the ultimate type of job. You just coach for 42 years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think it's so, most coaches, by the time they become a head coach, now there's that diamond in the rough who maybe only was an assistant a couple years, but most coaches, for example, John Harris, who just got let go today at SIUE, he was an assistant coach for 13 years before he got his first head coaching opportunity. And that's at the Division I level. That's not counting, any prior coaching he might have been doing. And so you are starting out, for someone like me, I know players who started out or people who started out as managers kind of work their way up into director of basketball ops roles, which is basically you're doing the team travel, team budget. So you're not coaching, but you're on staff. And, those people are making, anywhere, depending on the program, 28 to, 50,000 at the big time programs. And then your assistant coaches, like I was saying, are making anywhere from 50,000 to 110,000. So, but you definitely work your way up to being a head coach. It's not just something that's handed to you. Here's the keys to a program and $350,000. I mean, a lot of these coaches really, Paul, for instance, told me one time he started out at Missouri Southern, a Division II school in Joplin, Missouri. He was having to do construction on the side while he was an assistant coach at the Division II level, just to make ends meet because they weren't paid that well. And then he turned out to be a head coach. So you definitely pay your dues. That's for sure.
Yeah, really. Wow. That's, but it's worth it if you hang in there, it's a nice living. Tyler, this hour went very fast as they usually do. I like to, we'll have you, I like to follow you over the next, month or two on what's going on. I like to have you as recurring guest because we always have a lot of fun, chatting about all this stuff.
Absolutely.
This is my segment called the Hit and Miss, which, the word association. I can't let you go without doing this. This is part of the deal. You sign up for this. I would never go with this. Yep, you got to hang in with this here. This is the tough part. All right.
Absolutely. I would never go without doing it. You know that. That's my favorite part too.
All right. No, you got to do it. All right. You ready? Here we go.
Yep.
All right. Favorite food?
Chicken tenders.
Okay. John Wooden,
legend.
Mississippi.
Well, I'm looking at the Mississippi River standing in my apartment right now, so I'll say river.
Lou Alcindor,
basketball.
Elvis Presley.
I'm going to name a song, Little Less Conversation.
Okay. Yeah. That's the new they did like a retro type version, or they did some kind of like remake on that, right? Some kind of fast version. Dollar bill.
Green.
Madison Square Garden.
Iconic.
The best thing about basketball.
Winning.
The slam dunk.
I
might get you on this one. I might get you. Excuse me?
Exciting.
Okay. That was Tyler Onstott. I am Ray K. That was exciting. We hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time. This episode is sponsored by Hello Honeydew, a leading free utilities concierge service. Hello Honeydew is a free service designed to relieve the stress of a moving house, and it saves you time, money, and headaches on all your essential home service needs. We will hook up your gas, electricity, internet, TV, water, and home security systems in just one 15 to 20-minute phone call. You will also receive a free Amazon Echo Dot just for setting up an appointment. If you have closed on a house and have received your closing date, call us now for a free appointment and a free Amazon Echo Dot at 732-859-2019 and visit us at hellohoneydew.com for more information.